This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another show. We have another terrific interview with a fantastic comedy writer and producer. This guy's done it all. Let's welcome to the interview stage, it's Bob Ettinger. Bob, it's so great to hear your voice. Welcome to the podcast stage. We have a lot of past. How you been, buddy?
Been doing good. I appreciate you reaching out. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been a real joy of doing this podcast, is connecting with old friends from the business. We always said that we don't miss the running of clubs and restaurants is a big thing, but we miss the people. Now, I know a lot about you, but I want to bring it out in the podcast. Why don't you share with the audience, how did you kind of get into comedy? How did you decide you were funny and you wanted to do stand-up comedy?
Well, I was one of those people who really loved comedy growing up. I wasn't really necessarily the class clown per se, but, could write things and do things. So actually when I was in high school, I grew up in Pasadena, which is the home of the world famous Ice House.
Right.
And at the Ice House at the time, they had a comedy class taught by Danny Mora. Who I think may have played your club.
There's a name from the past, Danny Mora.
Yeah.
Great guy.
So him and peer group workshops, he did a live comedy class. And I believe I was the youngest person in the class by quite a bit. And during that time, I also had a creative writing class. And so one day we had free writing. So I said, okay, I'm going to write jokes. And so I turned in my paper, and my teacher has this horrified look, and she calls me up to the front of her desk and points at this paper. And on the paper is a red F. I'm like, what's going on? She goes, I don't want you to just write down people's jokes. I want you to be creative writing. I'm like, those are my jokes.
She didn't believe they came from you.
Yes. So he goes, those are my jokes. And she gives me a double take. I was like, really? I'm like, yeah. And she grabs the paper back, and she grabs a red pen, and then writes a big slash down the side of the F to make it an A.
That's awesome. Now, this may be taxing your memory, but do you remember any of your first jokes?
Oh, God. There's one that, of course, back then they're all horrible, right? So this is the whole point of this, I guess. I remember at that time there was a thing called Freshen Up gum. And the Freshen Up gum was the gum that went squirt.
Right. I remember that.
So I had a joke about a birth control gum that would keep guys from going squirt. So that was my big joke back then.
Birth control gum, the gum that won't let you squirt.
Exactly.
Oh, now that's, for a young guy that was just on the fringe of show business, that was not a bad first joke.
Well, not too bad. I don't know that it ever made it to one of your stages, but not bad.
Well, it probably better that it didn't, but I just think that for a young guy just going to initial comedy classes, that's not a bad start. Obviously, you had a talent for writing. I know that later in this interview, that'll come up as being an important part of your career. But so comedy writing and then going to this comedy class with Danny Mora kind of gave you your start. How long did you participate in Danny's class?
Danny's class probably ran a couple months, I think. We had like a final showcase in the Ice House main room, which was fun.
Oh, cool.
When I was touring campuses, my older brother had attended UCLA, so I was on campus visiting him. And that day I was on campus, the Daily Bruin, which is the daily newspaper, had an article on a thing called the UCLA Comedy Club. And so, lo and behold, here is a student group that did shows in dorms. And so that really sealed the deal for me. It's like, wait a second, I can join this group and do stand-up on campus? This is great.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a great way to start, too, because you're with your peers, and those audiences seem a little more acceptive to material in young comics. Maybe
Very
not as
true.
Maybe not as critical as a paid audience in a club is what I meant.
Oh, for sure. No, the other brilliant thing they did, although it was very taxing at the time, was they figured out, okay, we'll do shows in the dorms, but we better not do the same show every time because no one will come see us. So they instituted the rule that pretty much every show had to be new material.
Yeah,
so you had to create 5 new minutes every time you did one of these things.
Yeah, which is really the total opposite of what we went for in the clubs. If you had good material, we wanted you to repeat it because we wanted people to come back and bring their friends. But at the same time, that kind of pressure must have really helped you focus on your writing even more.
It really did. We got to do a best of at the end of every quarter where you could sort of cherry pick, okay, what bits worked and do those again. And that's what really gave me lots of confidence because we had guys who would just come out there and just crush it every time. And I would be like pretty 50-50. I'd have a good set for half of it, maybe the other half not so much. Because again, it's brand new stuff. You've never done it anywhere. But some of the guys who were in that group are guys you're familiar with. Ed Solomon.
Oh, Ed, a famous writer.
So Ed was part of that. Talk about your famous writers. We had Shane Black was part of that group.
Really?
Weapon.
Oh, gosh.
Jim Hirschfeld was part of that group from Meet the Parents.
You just had a wealth of talent all in one place. But UCLA,
it's a family talented group, yeah.
But UCLA is kind of a crucible in the Southern California area for talent, whether it's sports, academics, and of course, as we're talking about writing, because you really have the best of the Hollywood scene sending their kids or going to that university. That's what a great opportunity, and forcing you to write new material every show, even though I wouldn't have recommended that down the road, is a great way to force yourself to create a set. Because if you could do 5 new minutes 5 different times, you get to a regular club, you might have 20 minutes to play with.
Yeah, exactly. Another guy who was part of that group was, I think the person who led me to you was Howard Leff.
Oh, okay. Well, one of my questions was, how did you end up working at Laughs? Were you a referral or did you send me a tape?
I don't remember for sure, but I do remember Howard. I knew Ed worked for you, but I was not as tight with Ed at that point as I was with Howard. Howard and I would go and do a lot of clubs in LA together. And so I know Howard worked for you for a time, and I think he might have been my end.
He and Ed Solomon did come up quite a bit in those early days. And if they brought you up, I was always quick to accept referrals from other comics because nobody would dare refer somebody that wasn't funny.
Right.
Because that would really taint their future at the club. So when somebody said, hey, give this guy a shot, now normally that would mean you came up as an opening act and kind of showed yourself. Now, had you started working any of the clubs in LA, kind of doing some open mics?
I actually, in retrospect, planned it pretty smartly. I did a lot of stuff in LA, and I knew I wanted to go on the road, and I started booking myself out, and I had a day job, which ended up sort of costing me a little bit in the end. I'll tell you that story. So by the time I quit my job, this was back in the heyday of comedy when everyone was booking really far out. So I remember when I quit my job in September, I was booked from, and again, this is pretty much as an opener. I was booked pretty solidly as an opener from September of one year through June of the next.
Yeah, that's good work lineup, yeah.
So, I felt a nice little cushion to, quit my job and at least knew I had income coming in. Little did I know the gigs would fall out and cancel. I didn't figure that part out there. But
really
naive to figure that factor. But
how many fell out?
Not too many, but
yeah, that wasn't too common.
At that point, when you're counting on every dollar, then everyone seems very huge, right?
Right. And we should remind the audience, it's been mentioned a couple times over the last year, that opening acts weren't making a ton of money. When you're doing, 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes on stage, and you are kind of an unproven professional comic, you are still a professional because you're getting paid. But I think the average was $150, $200 a week, maybe. And when you figure transportation and food, you're not netting a lot of money. Now, as a club owner, we provided a place to stay and usually some food and drink at the club, but still, it's a rough go. It's just part of the process, though.
Right. So I think some of the places, I remember I got in pretty good with the Ice House Booker, and they had a number of rooms on the road where they'd actually fly you to Texas and to open.
Oh, wow.
and put you up, and actually pay you a decent enough wage. Those were actually kind of on the higher end, along with the improvs in terms of as the opening spot, what you would make.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Bob, is I was a cheap ass club owner.
I'm just saying there was. I just want the poor people to realize I was making a little bit more than that, mostly, but not everything.
Well, and I'm sure you didn't stay in opening act too long, but once you do get to the feature position, now you can really make some money. It might be as low as $300 or $400 a week, but it could be as high as $600 to $800 a week. And
I think it's an accurate range. Yeah.
Right. And now at that point, if your housing's paid for and your transportation isn't crazy, you can make it work. Do you remember any of those visits to the club? Because you worked my clubs a lot.
Yes, I remember. I never made it to the Stockton Club. That's the only one I never got to do. But my very first week was at the original Birdcage, which, if you're a comic on the road, was like a great place to be because the condo was right near like a comic book store, an arcade.
Yeah.
There was a really great Tower Records right up the street. I mean, it was just, if you've got a place to be during the day, it's a great spot to be.
Yeah, it was a little.
Good at night.
It was a small kind of nook comedy club. It only sat maybe 120 tops, if that, and we were like stashed behind a movie theater or something. But
right.
It was the original room was right in this open air mall that had a lot of other services. And if I remember correctly, the condo was an apartment literally right across the street, so you could walk.
It was super close.
Well,
so my very first week was with Bobby Gaylor and Brian Catalina.
Okay, good show.
And it was in December, and I remember for whatever reason we didn't draw enough to do shows the first two nights. So I remember driving both Brian and Bobby crazy because I was like bouncing off the walls, ready to wanting to do a show. We ended up getting Yahtzee at the Toys R Us and playing Yahtzee all day long.
Oh, how funny. Well, there were times, and that club ended up moving to a more...
I played the other location. In fact, ironically enough, the tape I would send to other bookers was the tape I taped from that club.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was a nice room once we moved, and it was bigger, more professional, and right on a main drag, so there was a lot of exposure. Yeah. And that club was actually very successful. The original room was sweet and quaint, but it wasn't financially successful. Thus, we moved it. And you didn't miss anything in Stockton. That club was a challenge. Stockton was a rough room to do comedy, and the audience was just bizarro. And we didn't stay there that long. Well, that's great. Now, you worked with anybody you remember famous working with at Laughs, or any fun off stage?
Lots of both. Lots of good headliners. So, Bobby Slayton, Willie Tyler and Lester, Larry Wilson, who I ended up doing some writing for.
Oh, cool.
Gosh, just lots of good people.
Yeah, we were pretty lucky. We hit a good core of people, and everybody you just mentioned have already been interviewed on this podcast. They're all good friends and very funny headliners. And were you involved in any of the offstage shenanigans? We used to have a bowling night, do some other fun stuff.
Yeah, no, there was almost like being at camp in some respects. So we'd have the bowling night. I remember doing basketball at some park where Lynn joined us and abused us with her baseline jumper.
Yeah,
she was a really good player. I wasn't expecting that much, and then all of a sudden she's just scoring at will. It's like, oh my God, I have to guard this girl.
Oh, that's so funny. Lynn, for those in the audience, has been on several of the podcasts, but she was an opening act MC who was also one of my club managers, and she managed the Citrus Heights room for many years. And a lot of people didn't know, the comics, for example, that she was an all-star basketball player at her high school. And she would go out and teach some of the boys about basketball.
No, she was very good. And it was fun because we also got to meet the comics that's working the other club.
Yeah, and I think...
whatever club you weren't at, you would go and meet the comics at the other one.
Yeah, there was always kind of a camaraderie. We like to include the comics in not only expecting professional, funny material on stage, but off stage, we like to include them in the comedy family and do things with them. So I'm glad you had a chance to participate in some of that.
Yeah, I got to meet Mike Larson, who ended up running for Congress this last go around.
Yeah, that's so funny you mentioned that. Mike Larson and I have exchanged a couple emails. I haven't interviewed him yet, but it's not often that a stand-up comic becomes a congressman.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, he didn't quite get the Democratic nod, but he put in a good effort for it, for sure.
Yeah, and just to have somebody, I mean, a lot of us would look at DC and think, hey, it's all a big joke, but
Right,
to actually have a stand-up comic get a shot at Congress is pretty great. Well, you got a chance to work with a lot of people, and you worked all the clubs. I know you were at the Downtown Club a lot, and you had a fondness for the original room. I'm sure you enjoyed working the old SAC room.
Yes, the original Old Sac Room was, I think we talked about this briefly, is arguably, I think, one of my top 5 rooms that I ever got to work. I really love that room. It just is perfect for comedy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, a lot of people don't realize the low ceiling and the tight space.
It's very, very reminiscent, other than the brick, of the Ice House.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Only we were bigger, I think.
Yeah, I think you were. I think that's right.
The Ice House wasn't quite as big, but that's great that you mentioned
oh my
that.
gosh, they would cram people into the Ice House. Oh my gosh, the tables were so tiny you couldn't, they would shoehorn people in there. Your club is a lot of people, and you could actually sit at the table and have a nice go of it. So it was good.
Well, we wanted people comfortable to enjoy themselves. Well, we really have appreciated all your years of working. And you worked all stages of comedy, you worked all the clubs. Now, I know that you had a lot of success in writing, but even as a performer, didn't you perform on Comedy Central?
I did have a couple shots on Comedy Central. I did your shot at your show.
Yeah, you were on our show, Live at Laughs. Yeah.
I did one or two other things. Oh, I did something called Comedy Express at a Bigby's in West LA.
Oh, cool. So you had a little TV exposure. That's fun.
A little TV. It was nice, yeah.
Now, I know that you said you wrote for Larry Wilson, a very talented comic magician and good friend of mine. And I'm sure you've done a lot of writing because that seems to be a real talent for you. Now, weren't you one of the guys that was submitting material for Jay Leno on The Tonight Show?
Oh, good memory. Yeah. I was one of the Leno guys. I was one of the guys, thanks to Steve Bruner, who was also submitting stuff for the Byron Allen show. So Byron, in Byron's case, it was very different. So Jay, you just basically tore open a newspaper and figured he's going to do something about the news, and let me write some jokes. And so I got a few on. But Byron is very different because he actually gave you a topic. He goes, I want to do a monologue about X. And so you just write jokes about X, because that's what the monologue is.
And did you and Steve Bruner team up, or you were just both happened as individuals to submit material?
At that time, I do actually a little writing and editing for Steve these days too, and I did it back then. And he would look at my act. We would go on the road together a lot. And Steve, as you know, is amazing. So
one of the best and cleanest stand-up headliners out there. Yes.
And he would go, well, here's a tag for the bit, and you hear it, and you go, immediately say, yeah, that'll work. Because Steve knows, You don't even have to try it. I know it's going to work,
Well, he had a good ear for comedy, which is important. In fact, it's one of the things that's interesting about my career on the fringe of show business is that I never considered myself an entertainer or funny or a joke teller, but I had a good ear for what was funny and what wasn't. And the timing is so important. But I think
Steve, I think you were one of the first people to move him with the headline, weren't you?
I believe so. Yeah. Steve is a great friend. He still works for me. I'm still producing some fundraisers, and Steve will still come up. And he's been on the podcast. He's a very funny comic. Now, how did this lead to, we talked about it briefly before we went on to the podcast. There's a comic actor by the name of Don Reed, and you were a quote unquote his creative consultant. Why don't you explain that?
Sure. So Don is another comedy club, UCLA comedy club guy who I kind of lost track of a little bit, and then reconnected at a place called Knuckleheads in Phoenix. We were both working in town. And he decided that he was going to do some one-man shows based on his life, and his life is amazing. So he would call me periodically and go, hey, I need a joke here, or hey, I need a joke there, or how about a joke about this? Without even knowing the full show. And so I would create these jokes, and lo and behold, they would end up in the shows. And so he's done probably, about 5 or 6 one-man shows.
Well, here's something,
or he will be, I should say.
Here's a side question, and I don't mean to get into your business, but I know that when people wrote for Carson or for Leno, there was kind of a standard $50 per joke, or there was like a baseline pay for written material. When you're creating material for another comic that's doing a one-man show, did he pay you by the joke? Was it a fee for being a comedy consultant? How would you label yourself, and how did that financially be rewarding?
It really differs from act to act. The Don situation, I can't really get into a whole lot. But the rest of it, I know a lot of people it's per joke, but I would write for a lot of people and I would charge them an hourly. I always felt like I don't want to be the comedy police and say, are you doing this joke? Are you doing that joke?
Right.
It's like, here's what I can create, in an hour, and charge you about what it would cost you for a joke.
Well,
hopefully it'll be worth your while to hire me. Well,
let's go down that path just a little to educate our audience. So a joke actually, which is a big deal on a comedy stage or in a presentation to break up an audience, can actually only last anywhere from 30 to maybe 90 seconds. They're not necessarily story jokes. I mean, we've talked before about the famous Larry Miller that could tell a 20-minute story and have laughs all the way through it. But your standard joke or theme might only be a minute, 2 minutes, and then you can maybe add to it. So when somebody would get paid $50 to do a Jay Leno joke, it was literally probably a 60-second, 90-second throwaway on his monologue. If you're doing jokes by the hour, how much material would you come up with? 3 minutes, 5 minutes? People need to understand that it takes a lot longer. My point is, and I'm probably going way off base here, Bob, but it could take an hour to write a solid 3-minute bit.
Oh yeah, for sure. So what I would do is I would literally charge by my time, and some of it would be brand new jokes. I would usually work with someone who already had an act. I think always, in fact. And I would watch their tape, and I go, okay, here's a tag for this. Here's a tag for that. Okay, here's a joke that you can use as part of this run.
Well, I was doing it wrong all those years. I was doing that with comics all the time at the club. I never got paid. No, but exactly. I totally get it. It's almost like being a punch-up artist.
Yeah,
you would get a script and you could punch it up and make it better.
Right. That was the guys. And then there were a couple people up front who wanted to pay me per joke. And I just said, and like I told you, I was like, I'm not going to go around and see what joke you're doing and what joke you're not doing. I just don't want to do that.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Well, I appreciate you going down that path. I know it's not quote unquote funny, but it's an interesting aspect of the business that maybe the audience doesn't understand, that there's people out there that you'll never hear about that have written some really famous or funny bits, and they got paid to punch up or create material for somebody that was the performer of that material. And there's a difference between a great example would be also Ed Solomon, who is one of the best writers. He's had some famous movies. He's a multimillionaire, very, very successful. But I've been honest before, and I was honest for him back in the day. He wasn't a terrific performer. He was a terrific writer. I mean, magnificent writer, but there's a difference between writing and performing. And you were able to do both. I mean, you were a fine stand-up comic. You never got...
I always preferred the writing better, but I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I mean...
and then getting back to the writing really quickly, everybody's deal was a little different. Like, for example, Larry Wilson created this brand new original show that he ran in Reno. It was called Wonderland. I don't know if you ever got to see that. So it was a blend of him doing his comedy magic, which is like the best in the business. I love watching that. And he had these just amazing dancers who were putting together these really complicated, really energetic routines. And so part of my deal was I'm going to charge you per hour, but if this thing runs into success, I want a bonus if it runs for a year. And it ran for a year, and I made the bonus. So it was fun.
Well, Larry's an honest guy, and I'm sure he appreciated all the work you put into it. And that show was a huge success for Larry. He's now teaching communication under the Wilson method. And
good for him.
he is a terrific entertainer, but also is now sharing his expertise as a communicator. And I think that those things made him a really good act. Now, you've done much, much more than comedy, right, and perform on stage yourself. And I wanted to get to this because it was a thing that thrilled my wife, Jill, more than anything.
Oh, okay.
You were the project coordinator, you might want to explain that, for the game show Jeopardy, which is one of the country's most popular game shows ever. And you didn't just do it once or twice, you did it for 10 years?
Yeah, so
that's amazing, Bob.
At the time, I was trying to get a job as a sitcom writer. So I knew I wanted to be on the Sony lot because that was the closest one to where I was living. And so I went to their temp department, and they said, well, we don't really have anything on any of the shows, but we do have this job where you would call people all day. And they're like, oh, I don't want to do telemarketing. What, are you kidding me? He goes, no, actually what you'd be doing is you'd be calling people and letting them know that they could try out for Jeopardy. And I thought to myself, okay, these people probably would like to receive that phone call. I probably wouldn't be
right.
That.
It's not like you're trying to sell them something. It's like they want a prize.
Right. So, yeah, so they were obviously thrilled to get the call and to come on in to try out. So that's how I first got in with them, was being the person who called it.
How excited were the people?
I was the one who oversaw the process of people calling in. And then under my watch, we switched it from calling to emailing.
So you kind of took charge of the notification process. Now, the people must have already submitted themselves. So getting this call or email saying you've been accepted to be a participant on Jeopardy had to have been like winning the lottery for these people. They must have been ecstatic.
They were. You would have to go through a slight, and they would also help book people when it came time for them to be on the show. And so one guy who had been there forever booked probably the most people on the show. But during my tenure, I ended up booking the two who were the biggest winners of all time on the show. So I made the phone call to let Brad Rutter know he was on the show. And I made the phone call to let Ken Jennings know he was on the show.
Now, Ken Jennings, he's like hosting it now, isn't he?
He was, what happened was
he a guest
Alex
host?
Passed.
Right.
Well, he's a guest host. So what happened was this past season, as Alex was not doing well health-wise.
Yeah, and our condolences for anybody that knew Alex Trebek. He was a great entertainer and held that show down for all those decades, but we did lose him in this last year. But I know that they were using some of the old winners as guest hosts. I'm sorry, I just wanted to explain to the audience.
No, that makes sense. And the thing that I wrote a little tribute to him on Facebook, he was actually really funny. I remember seeing him one day, and he was riffing a little bit. And I thought to myself, okay, he's got a couple good planned jokes that he'll try out every episode, and he'll entertain the audience with that, and they'll never be the wiser. But every episode, he had something different, funny to say. And we didn't have a warm-up comic like most shows because he was that good at it.
Oh, interesting. Did you ever write for him?
No. They had a whole writing team down there. Okay. I tried at one point, but no, that was not what I was doing. I was mostly in the contestant area, and then I became a special projects coordinator, as you mentioned. But they hired Ken as a consultant of some kind, I believe, as Alex's health was not doing well. He ended up giving some clues and doing some stuff. And so he was the first of many guest hosts that they're going to have. And it sounds like they're going to have probably about 5 or 6 more. So I think they'll end up having probably about maybe 8 all told.
Oh, wow. Well, those are big shoes to fill.
They are.
I mean, Alex Trebek was the face of that game show for 3 decades. Long time, right?
Yeah, since 84.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I remember we did Rock and Roll Jeopardy, and we had Jeff Probst was our host from Survivor. Mm-hmm. And I remember Jeff, and this is not to say anything bad of Jeff, but Jeff had to do a couple retakes of clues because sometimes he would sing a melody, which you're not allowed to do because then you end up paying for it.
Right.
So we would have clues about lyrics. You're just supposed to read them straight, and he would read them. He would like sing them, and they're like, no, we can't do that.
Oh, that's so funny.
So I remember him redoing these clues, and I'm thinking to myself, what are we doing? He goes, oh, we have to retake clues. And then it just dawned on me, it's like, Alex never has to retake clues. I'd never seen it before because Alex never did it.
Right. He never had a
And it
problem.
wasn't
He was
because
a smart guy.
Yeah, and it wasn't because Alex was, it's, I'm too good to redo it. It was perfect every time. You didn't have to redo it.
I got to tell you, though, one thing funny about Alex Trebek that always got me is that every now and then you kind of cringed a little because he would look at the contestants and like, you didn't know that, this kind of, authority of indignation that somebody didn't know something that he knew. And it was so funny because he never did it in anyone's face. He never wanted to make anybody look bad.
Right.
But you knew it when he was like, oh, come on.
Some of the guest hosts are doing that now too, unfortunately.
Oh, that's funny. Now,
he was amazingly good at it, though.
How often were you on set much, or was this all backstage?
I was. So my deal was, this is going to give you your audience a little bit of an insight. So not only did I oversee the booking, but during tape days when I first started, I oversaw all the paperwork. And so everybody had to fill out all this paperwork saying that they'd not been in any other shows and just eligibility things and all that kind of stuff. So as I'm looking at everybody doing the paperwork, something caught my eye right away, and it was consistent throughout almost every taping. And that is, the world doesn't have that many left-handed people,
right,
compared to right-handed people. But on Jeopardy, it was literally like 50-50 every single day,
really?
If not more lefties than righties. I don't know what that means, but I always noticed it.
I thought you were going to say that there's less lefties, but they're smarter. But that's kind of fascinating that all the people you saw come through the show, it wasn't one way or the other. It was 50-50 righties and lefties. That is kind of one of those nuances that I bet nobody picked up on.
Yeah, I would think the general population's got to be about 80-85% right-handed, I would think.
Oh yeah, it's way up there. Well, that working with Jeopardy for 10 years, that's a career in itself. What do you got going on now, or do you have something coming up soon?
So I've got a couple things I'm working on. The aforementioned Don Reed and I are working on a game show concept that we're looking forward to getting out there to pitch.
Well, that's good. Well, let me know how that goes. It would be so fun to actually write a game show. I mean, it's just one of those things that I know Drew Carey's just having so much fun being a game show host, and a lot of people don't realize they'll shoot a couple weeks of shows in like 2 days. So
right.
You're only working 2 days and you got the rest of the week off and you make a lot of money.
Yeah,
but,
I think we figured out Alex worked like 46 days a year, 48.
Yeah, well, he was the host. He could just walk in, do his job, and leave.
Yeah, so we would do a week's worth of shows a day. And he'd have like a promo day and like some other day, and then that was it. He was done.
Oh, that's so funny.
So we're looking to pitch a show. We actually had an online show for a bit, hosted by the March Theater up in Oakland and San Francisco.
Oh, cool! That would have been fun.
In the room. Yeah, it was fun. We did an online Zoom game show.
Online Zoom game show, and it was the smartest person in the room.
Right?
Is it kind of like what are those trivia nights they'll have at bars and stuff?
Yeah, like a pub. Like a pub trivia kind of thing. So,
but you made it more official,
right? So what we did is we had questions that were multiple choice, and we figured out on Zoom that people could ring in and pick their choice. Which we didn't figure out was that identifying the people who had the right choice was not easy to do on Zoom. That was the downfall.
Well, there's always going to be something to make it difficult, right?
Right. So it's like, okay, who got the right? Somebody tell us, please.
Oh, that's funny. And that's what you're working on with Don Reed. And then he has another one-man show.
It's a different. So it's a different game show. I'm working with him. That one, and there's a different one as well that I'm working with Don. So it's actually two different shows with Don.
So you guys are kind of partnering up on some production stuff. You're
on some stuff, yeah.
That's awesome. I enjoyed producing TV and concerts. I would recommend it to anybody that can find a niche and make it work. And I think that if you guys came up with a quality game show or Don ends up with a new one-man show, I mean, all those are worthy efforts in the art of comedy. So congratulations.
Well, thanks. It was fun to watch the various people because I could see them on Zoom as we're reading the questions. And so sometimes I would write a question that would get a big laugh, and that was always fun to see on Zoom. I remember one woman in particular was cracking up about one joke that I wrote, and she was just laughing the entire time until we got to the next question. So that was fun to watch.
All entertainers, especially.
You want the question, Scott?
Well, hold on. I want to just state that all comics are doing it for that validation. And then when you hear the audience, or even in the case of my bonus shows, which we call an audience of one, when you get that laughter, it's validating your work. So what was the joke that made her laugh on and on?
So which of these was not a brand of air freshener? A, Glade. B, Febreze. C, Silent but Deadly.
Well, I bet that one worked pretty good.
It did. But I just was watching her crack up, so it was just like, really fun.
Oh, nothing. That's funny. Well, Bob, you've had an amazing career. I can't tell you how excited I am about your upcoming projects. It sounds like you and Don Reed have some irons in the fire, and hopefully something will pan out for you. I have one other solo thing I'll sort of throw out here. Yeah, sure. Let's plug away.
Ironically enough, Bruner's got a copy of this right now. During this last period of time we had available where I couldn't pitch things, I was decided to write a book. And the book has to do, there's short stories, but everyone has something to do with sports.
Okay. A short story sports book.
So it's called Some Sports Stories.
Oh.
And so some are me growing up playing sports. Some are my daughter, who ended up being a really great basketball player.
Oh, cool.
Some was actually, when my dad passed, he was an avid baseball fan. So I talked at his funeral about him keeping score and how that pertained to his life. So that's in there as well.
Oh, cool.
The whole story of me spreading his ashes around to various sort of sports locales in honor of him.
Oh, well, that's very special, Bob. I'm sorry to hear about your loss, but to do a tribute like that.
Yeah. And it's some lighter, funnier stories on the golf course and other spots as well. So
the name of the book once more is
Some Sports Stories.
Some Sports Stories.
The game plan is to get a few more people to get some comments from them and look for a publisher.
Awesome.
And,
well,
once we get a publisher, I'll circle back and do some of the stories for you on the air.
Yeah. Let's have you back on and share some of that. Well, Bob, you've had such an interesting life, starting off doing comedy on UCLA's campus, working the clubs like mine, and then ending up as the project coordinator for Jeopardy for over 10 years, and now working on these special productions. I just think it's so exciting, and you've brought such a variety. It's interesting how, as a stand-up comic and a writer, you've able to take several paths in your life and your career, and yet it all comes back down to being a guy that can write and has a sense of humor.
Right.
But it just shows there's so many different things that you can do with an art form or a talent. Well, we really appreciate you being on the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go away. I've got a great comedy set. Don't forget, Bob Ettinger live on stage. That's right. That's what's coming up. I have a live set I'm going to share with you. Bob, thanks for doing the podcast.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Here it is. Bob Ettinger live on stage.
Saturday Night Bob Ettinger.
How we doing? Doing good? Yeah. Had a great breakfast today. Went to Winchell's. Ooh. Very impressive place. Weird place, Winchell's. Huge sign on the wall. It says donuts 45 cents, favorites 50. Going, who decides this? Walk to the guy, go, how much are the glaze? Guy looks at me, goes, are they your favorites? I'm reading the paper there, though. They have a list for the best shows for kids to watch. Number 1 on this list, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Horrible show for kids to watch. First thing every show, old guy wearing a sweater, winking at kids, asking them if they want to be his neighbor. Then before these kids can say anything, he's already slipping into something more comfortable. Mailman's name is Mr. McFeely. Now come on here, okay? They're selling weird stuff on TV now, though. They got these adult diapers on TV now. Have you seen these things? Product called Depends. What a horrible name for this product. If I bring this thing home, will it work? Depends. We don't know. Give it a shot. Come on. It's better than what my mom did to me growing up, though. My mom used to write my name on the back of my underwear. Apparently she thought I'd forget who I was during the day. I have no idea. But I tell you, it does come in handy when I have to cash a check and need a second piece of ID. Mom's happy now, though. She's a grandma now, grandma to twins. Yeah, she dresses up the twins. Got them both dressed up, little pink dresses on, little pink bows in their hair. Both look pretty cute. So even from across the room, you can tell. These are two pissed off little boys. Oh, yeah. My mom raised me differently. My mom raised me to be a nice guy, kind of a dying breed. No one likes to admit they're a nice guy, because they say nice guys finish last. I say, hey, what's wrong with that? Isn't that what most women want? Women are cheering, the guys are going, I don't get it. What the hell's he talking about? And the guys that aren't getting it are the guys that aren't getting it. So there you go.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Bob Ettinger live on stage. And thank you so much for joining us for this week's show. I enjoyed interviewing Bob and hearing all about Jeopardy, and his comedy set's very funny. If you get a chance, tell your friends, share the podcast, and we'll have another creative, new, fun show for you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.